Welcome to Gloucester Folk Trail 2022 Family Storytelling, a World Tour of Tales. With me, Chloe of the Midnight Storytellers. Our first story comes from Ireland. It's a very old story. And it starts with a young man, a poor young man who couldn't get a job, who couldn't afford friends, who lived all by himself in a little cottage on the edge of a village. He was so poor he couldn't afford proper food. This poor young man, all he had to eat for breakfast, lunch and tea every day of his life was gruel. Now, some of you enjoy porridge, and some of you have wonderful, delicious things on your porridge. You have sugar, and you have fruit, and you have honey, or you have golden syrup, or some of you will even put chocolate in your porridge, I know. But gruel isn't like that. Gruel's like porridge gone horribly wrong. Gruel is sloppy. Gruel is ploppy. Gruel looks like somebody's already eaten it. Ugh. It was a hot summer morning, and this lad was at his kitchen table, and he was trying to eat yet another bowl of gruel. And there were flies buzzing all around the kitchen, and every time he lifted a spoonful of ploppy, sloppy gruel, a fly would come in zzz, and land on his food, and then more flies bzzz, and bzzz, and bzzz, until it just got too much for him. He lost his temper and smacked his hands down on the table. The bowl went that way, the spoon went that way. The gruel went everywhere. There was gruel on the ceiling. There was gruel running down the walls. There was gruel dripping off the end of his nose. After that, he felt better, and he cleaned up. And as he cleaned up, he decided he wasn't going to stay there anymore. He decided he would take the risk of going out into the world and adventuring until he made his fortune. So he packed up his very few belongings into the traditional spotted handkerchief on the end of a stick. But there was something else he did that not many adventurers remember to do. He got some fabric, and he made himself a sash, and he got a pen and some black ink, and he wrote in big black letters on the sash, "I killed 7 with one blow." What had he killed? When he splatted his hands and the gruel down on the table, he'd also splatted 7 flies. He'd seen them lying there on the table, dead. And he thought to himself, I killed 7 with one blow. I must be a hero. I am amazing. And so he wrote that on his sash, and then he set off walking. He walked and he walked out of the village and down the hill and over the hill and far away. He walked until the sun was setting and his feet hurt so much he couldn't walk any further. Luckily, he'd come to the edge of a forest. Now, he knew it is not safe to walk through the forest at night. So he made himself a bed of leaves and curled up and went to sleep. And he slept really well. He slept so well that as the sun rose and the birds sang next morning, he hardly stirred. He just rolled over and went on snoozing. He didn't even hear, coming up the track out of the forest towards him, thubbity-thud, thubbity-thud. Nay! There were riders, a long line of riders. There was a king and knights all on their horses. And normally if I say to you knights in armour, you're thinking shiny, you're thinking smart, you're thinking bold and brave. Well, not this lot. This lot were biffed and bashed and battered and dented, and all the plumes on their war helmets had been singed off. They looked as if they'd fought a battle and lost. As the king on his big white horse rode past our hero asleep in the leaves, the king happened to look down, and he saw the sash, the words on the sash, the words which you can remember. I killed 7 with 1 blow. And the king just happened to be a king who could read. Not all of them could in those days. And the king read the words and reined in his horse and said, "Bring us that man." And so some of the knights jumped down and woke the lad up and brought him to the king. And the king said, "I am so pleased to meet you. You are clearly a hero and an adventurer, and you're just the person I need. I've got a job for you, and before you do a stitch of work for me, I will pay you in advance 200 gold coins and a new horse and a suit of armour. Now what do you think of that?" And our hero looked at the king and smiled and bowed, because that's what you're supposed to do, and his mind was running, because you don't get made an offer like that if everything is safe and easy. But he said yes. Well, of course he said yes. "Your Majesty, I accept the job. What is it you would like me to do?" And the king said, "Well, I tell you what, if you do this job well, yes, if you do this job well, I will let you marry my daughter, the princess, and you get half the kingdom as her dowry. Now, what do you think of that, eh?" "Your Majesty, it sounds amazing, but what's the job? What is it you want me to do?" And the king's smile drained away, and he said, "Well, we've got a spot of bother with a dragon." "Sorry, Your Majesty, I didn't quite catch that word." And the king said, "It's a dragon. It's a great big dragon, and it's eating everybody and everything, and we tried to take it on, and look what happened to us. We're biffed, we're bashed, we're battered, we're dented, all our plumes have been singed off. And you, look, your sash says you killed 7 with 1 blow. You're the person we need. What do you say?" And by now, our young hero had a plan. Yeah, he was a young man with a plan. And it was a good plan. His plan was this: to say yes and take the 200 gold coins and the new horse and the suit of armour and ride over the hills and far away and never be seen again. And he would do absolutely fine selling the horse and the armour and living off the coins as well. That was his plan. Good plan, wasn't it? Well, up to a point. The king and the knights took our young man back to the castle, and there was the lovely chink-a-chink sound of gold coins being counted into the saddlebag. And then they put him in the armour, and then they put him on the horse, and he was ready to ride for his life, when the king drew his great big sword, walked up behind the horse and whacked it on the backside. "Nay!" And the horse bolted across the drawbridge and down the road. You see, what no one had told our hero was they'd specially trained that horse. They'd trained it to gallop straight to the hill where the dragon was living. The horse, with our young man clinging on, got to the top of the hill, but then, of course, it smelled dragon. Nay! It reared up, and that was too much for our young man. Thump! Splat! Off he fell straight into a muddy puddle and rolled and fetched up under the hedge that went round the top of the hill, and that was just as well, 'cause next minute down roared the dragon and pounced on the horse. And I better not tell you the detail, but that was the end of the horse. And then the dragon curled itself around and settled down for a snooze after its snack. And there was our young hero shivering and shaking with fear inside his armour underneath the hedge. What was he going to do? He needed a new plan. He needed a new plan. He came up with a plan. It was a good plan. He took off his armour very slowly and carefully so that it didn't scrape or squeak. And then he was tiptoeing past the end of the dragon, and he was going to run for his life. And it was such a good plan until the dragon woke up, and the dragon's enormous purple and blue scaly head lifted up, and the sooty-edged nostrils flared, and the dragon said, "I smell pudding!" And our young man, there was only one place left for him to run. There was a big tall tree at the top of the hill, and our young man ran for the tree, and faster than I can tell you, he climbed up that tree right to the top, and he hung on to the top of the tree, swaying dangerously. And the dragon looked around, and its claws were starting to climb the tree. But it didn't want to fly, because it still had a stomach full of, well, horse. And it didn't want to bother getting off the ground. So it reached up the tree as far as it could, and couldn't reach our hero. "Come down! I want to eat you!" "No, thanks. I like it up here. There's a good view." The dragon swung its tail spike, whoomph, and missed. "Bah! Very well. I can wait." And the dragon curled itself around the base of the tree and went back to sleep. And our young hero, clinging to the topmost part of the tree trunk, hearing things, branches, twigs cracking, and he needed a plan. He needed a new plan. He had a new plan. It was a good one, because there was one branch that stuck out over the top of the sleeping dragon, and his plan was to walk out or crawl out along the branch right to the end and drop down and run for his life. Good plan, yes? Well, yes, up to a point. So he got down onto the start of the branch, and he got his balance, and he was moving out along the branch, but the further he got out, the more the branch bent, and he got out a bit more, and of course he was right over the top of the dragon when the branch went crack, and down he dropped and landed, astride the back of the dragon's neck. And of course the dragon woke up. "You want to ride a dragon? I'll give you a ride you'll never forget." Whoomph went the great blue scaly wings, and the dragon uncoiled like a spring from around the tree and soared up into the air and started flying at top speed around the hill. But as fast as the dragon flew, and the more it barrel rolled in the air and looped the loop, the tighter our hero hung on. He could not be shaken loose. Finally, in a flying fury, the dragon turned and zoomed off low over the fields and the hedges and the ditches, flying as fast as it could into the distance. Meanwhile, back at the castle, the king was in his office signing the order for a short, cheap funeral for the hero who hadn't come back. And he'd just finished putting the royal seal on the document when the captain of the guards came rushing into his office. Your Majesty, the dragon's coming, everybody panic, the dragon's coming." Give the king his due, he did not panic. He called out all of the guards, all of his soldiers, and he led them himself up to the battlements. And there they looked out into the sunset sky, and against all the reds and oranges and golds and pinks of the sunset, they saw a little black shape that was getting bigger as the dragon flew straight at the castle. And all the soldiers and guards were trembling. You could hear their chainmail rattling. And the archers prepared. But that dragon was flying so fast, that dragon was so furious, that the young man was still clinging onto its neck. That dragon was not looking where it was going. Imagine, castle wall, tall and strong, it stood there for hundreds of years. Dragon, coming in hot. Thump! Badoink! The dragon crashed into the castle wall, knocked itself out and flooped to the ground. The young man jumped off. There you are, Your Majesty, one dragon as ordered. You better get down here a bit quick before it wakes up. The king ran down from the battlements, drew his great big sword, and that was the end of that dragon. Quite sad, but that sort of dragon eats everybody and everything. They can't be saved. And in many a story like this, the hero gets cheated of his reward. But not this time. The king kept his promise. There was gold, there was treasure, there was a wedding, and the king made our hero a baron and gave him a castle of his very own with as much gold and silver as he would ever need. And you would think that our hero lived happily ever after. Well, up to a point. It was about 2 weeks before the young man discovered that the princess he had married was so bad-tempered, so moody, that honestly, she was more of a dragon than the real one could ever have been. My next story comes from New Zealand, Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud. Among the Maori people of New Zealand, they tell a story of Father Sky and Mother Earth, the first two people in our world. And they say that in the very first days, Mother Earth and Father Sky were close together. They were close together, cuddling each other, hugging each other, and their children were squished in between them. And the children didn't like being squeezed and squished. Well, you don't, do you? So the children wriggled. The children, the little volcanoes, the children kind of pushed and shoved and elbowed and kicked a bit, and suddenly Father Sky broke away. Father Sky broke away and floated up and up and up until he reached where you can see him today. Father Sky spread out. He stretched. It felt quite good. But where was Mother Earth? Where was his beloved? He turned and he looked down and he saw Mother Earth completely naked. She hadn't anything to wear at all. Oh dear. But she also looked rather cold and lonely. And Father Sky knew that he wanted to make things for her to wear. And so Father Sky reached out between the stars and scooped up the stuff of the universe, the dust that circles the planets. And he got some of this together, and he made a sort of magical, sparkling pastry of universe stuff. And he rolled it out until there was enough for him to pick off pieces. And with those pieces, he made long, thin shapes and teased out bits at the end and stood them up. But that wasn't right yet. And he got some more of his magical universe pastry and made more shapes of those, smaller, long shapes, and stuck them all over the top. And that was nearly right. And then he changed the colours of the magical universe pastry. And there were greens, and there were pinks, and there were whites and yellows. And he made little, some of them roundish, some of them leaf-shaped, all right? And he stuck these all over the other shapes he'd made. And when he had bundles and armfuls of these presents that he'd made for Mother Earth, he scooped them all up and leaned down and threw them as gently as he could, so that all these presents, all these shapes, came spiraling and floating down and landed all over Mother Earth. Oh, that tickles. Oh, and she looked and she smiled, because what Father Sky had made for her was so, so beautiful. And they covered her, and they decorated her, and they made her shine, they made her sparkle, they gave her colours all over. And she was so happy that Father Sky had made these beautiful gifts for her. Father Sky, looking down, he was pretty pleased with himself. It's not often that a male gets it right with presents for the female, but he had done it perfectly. Oh, yes. He was very happy. And the presents stretched their roots down into the warm earth, stretched up and out with their branches, and opened up their leaves and their flowers, some of which turned to fruit. And among the Maori people of New Zealand, they say that is how trees came to be in our world. My next story for you is from Southern Africa, from the Zulu people of Southern Africa. And it's about a hunter. Because in the time of this story, you couldn't just go down to the shops and buy your dinner. You had to take your spears and your shield and your collecting bag, and you had to go out into the bush and catch your dinner. And the trouble was, even if you could catch something to take home to your family in the village, as you were taking that whatever it was home, there were other creatures out in the bush that wanted to take your dinner away from you and possibly include you as a snack. I'm talking lions and hyenas, and if there wasn't something like that, you might get squished by an elephant. And because the hunters in those days went barefoot, you were stubbing your toe, you were treading on sharp stones, and if you weren't treading on something like a sharp stone, you were treading on a scorpion that would sting you, or a snake that would poison you, and it was all really very, very dangerous and hard work and very, very hot under the sun. So this particular hunter was lazy. Well, that's what everybody said about him. He just didn't like all the hard work, and I don't entirely blame him. And he got left behind the main group like he often did, and he really didn't want to have to go trekking about. And then he heard a bird call, a very particular and special bird call, and it made him smile, because this was the call of the honey guide bird. And over thousands of years, the honey guide bird and humans had worked out a partnership. Humans love honey. They will go to great lengths. They will go to a huge amount of trouble to collect honey. But they're not so good at finding the nests, the bees' nests, that in that part of the world were usually high up in a tree. The honey guide bird could find the nests, but she wasn't so good at getting into the nest and picking out what she wanted, which were the bee grubs, before they hatched into bees. So the honey guide bird had trained the humans to follow her call. She would lead them to where there was a bee's nest up in a tree, and then the humans would do the work of lighting that little fire, little safe fire at the base of the tree, and sometimes the smoke would trickle up through the branches and send the bees to sleep in their nest, but mostly a human would have to take a smoking stick out of the fire and climb the tree with one arm and 2 feet and get up to the bee's nest and wave the smoking stick around the nest and hope that would send the bees to sleep enough for the human then to reach inside and scoop out the sticky, glooptious, unctuous honey and collect it into the bag. And the deal was this, that the person would always take a bit of the bee's nest and put it on the ground, leave it for the honey guide bird to pick out the bee grubs. That was why she led people to bees' nests, and the people knew that they had to let her have her reward. Except not this young man. He followed the bird as she flitted from tree to tree. They came to a big tall tree and he could just about see the nest up at the top and he could hear the buzzing. And he did the fire and he got the smoky stick and he climbed up the tree and he got the honey. And he didn't bother bringing down any more bits of the nest when he got back down to the ground with his collecting bag full. He looked at the little bird waiting on the ground off to one side and he said, "Well, why should I give you anything? I'm the one who did all the hard work. I had to walk through the bush. I had to light the fire. I had to climb the tree with a burning stick, and even so I didn't send all the bees to sleep. I still got stung. I am the one who did all the hard work. I am giving you nothing." And the lazy hunter turned and walked away. He went back to the village with the honey, and everyone praised him for being so clever. And the little honey guide bird couldn't do a thing about it. She followed him. She saw where he lived. She was furious. But she was a little honey guide bird. She wasn't big enough or strong enough to do anything to him. About 2 weeks later, the hunters from the village set off again, and that young man dawdled behind the way he so often did, and once again he heard the call of the honey guide bird, and he followed her as she flitted from tree to tree until they came to a huge, tall tree out on its own. He couldn't see a nest. He couldn't hear any bees at all. But she'd led him to good honey before, so he made the little fire. And he took a burning stick, a smoky burning stick, and with great difficulty, with one arm and 2 feet, he started climbing the tree trunk, and it was a long way up, and he was scraping his knees and his front, and he was just getting up to the first branch. And he looked up over the first branch, and right in front of his nose there was something fluffy, furry, dark, stripy. And it flicked as he breathed on it. And he came up a bit more, not really understanding what he was looking at. And then he saw a furry coat with spots. And there was a furry face right in front of him with a triangular pink nose and fangs. And he'd come right up in front of a sleeping leopard. Only the leopard wasn't asleep for very long, because in his panic, in his shock, the young man waved the smoking stick right in front of the leopard's nose, and the leopard woke up. And down slithered the young man, scraping and slithering and sliding and falling all the way back down the tree. Thump! Ow! He'd twisted his ankle and he'd probably cracked a rib. But he didn't have time to think about that because the fully awake leopard was coming down the tree after him. And the young man had to turn and run, limping and yelping and running for his life. And the thing is, a leopard can sprint for a while, but if you can keep running, you can probably get away. But then, of course, the young man had to stop and catch his breath, and the leopard was catching up with him. And then the young man had to run on a bit more, and the leopard was catching up again, and all the way back to the village. The young man did get back to the village. He was all right, but he was badly frightened. And both the young man and the leopard had been followed all the way, branch to tree to branch, by a very small and a very happy honey-guide bird who had had her perfect revenge. So, to finish off our mini world tour of tales today, I'm going to tell you a story that I think comes from Ireland. It's got fairies in it, and as a lot of people know, Ireland is still the place for fairies. But this is a story from the very, very long ago, from the time when there was still magic in the world and things were being made. And when trees appeared in this part of the world, the yew tree looked around and saw that it was very different from other trees. Most trees have broad, soft, green leaves. But the yew tree looked at itself and saw, well, you know what they look like. They're kind of spiky, aren't they? They got very dark, tiny little leaves like needles, really different from the others. And the yew tree looked around and it wasn't happy being different from the others. In fact, it was so unhappy that it complained to the fairies. And it said, I don't want to be different from the others. Can you make me beautiful, please? I just want to be beautiful. And the fairies, now, what we don't get taught these days is the fairies, I mean, it's dangerous to say their name. They're uneven-tempered. You've got to know what you're doing if you want to talk with the fairies. But the yew tree had spoken very politely, and that is the correct way to address the fairies. So they decided that time to be helpful. And they gathered some magic, and they stirred it all around to make a little spell. And they took that little sparkly fizzing spell and swoosh, badoink, they cast the spell over the little yew tree. And it was changed. And when the yew tree looked at itself, it was covered in leaves of shining yellow gold. Do you think the yew tree was happy then? Oh, yes! For about 5 minutes. Because around the corner and down the road there came 2 robbers with big sacks, and when they saw the yew tree with its golden leaves, they were very happy, and they ran up and they climbed all over the yew tree and they picked off every single golden leaf and stuffed their sacks full and ran away. And then the yew tree was not happy. No! I took all my leaves. I had such pretty golden leaves. It's not fair. Oh, fairies, please help me. Please. I just want to be beautiful. I don't like looking different from the other trees. Please give me pretty leaves. And the fairies felt sorry for the yew tree. And the yew tree was still speaking very politely. So the fairies decided to help all over again. And they stirred up another little fizzing, sparkling spell, and swoosh, badoink, they cast the spell over the yew tree. And when it next looked at itself, oh, it was covered in leaves of pure crystal. And a breeze blew, and the crystals chinked together with the most delightful sound. And then the breeze turned into a wind, and the wind turned into a storm. The sky filled with clouds, the rain poured down, a hurricane blew, and every single crystal leaf smashed and shattered on the ground. Do you think the yew tree was happy then? No, of course not. No! It's not fair! I just want nice, soft, green leaves, just like the other trees. Please, fairies, please. Please, can I have big, soft, green leaves? By now the fairies were getting a little bit fed up with this and all the noise, but they decided they would help another time. And they made another fizzing, sparkly little spell, and swoosh, doink, they cast it over the yew tree. And when it next looked, the biggest, the greenest, the softest, the most perfect green leaves a tree could ever dream of. And it held out its branches and its leaves to the sun, and the yew tree was so, so happy for 5 minutes, because around the corner and down the road there came trotting a hungry goat. And what does a hungry goat like best of all to eat? That's right, big, soft, new green leaves. The goat put its hooves up on the tree trunk and scoffed the lot. But the fairies didn't wait for the yew tree to make any more noise. They'd had quite enough of all that. They hurriedly spun and wove a big, fizzing, sparkling spell. They picked it up, and it sizzled and sparked in their fairy fingers, and swoosh, badoink, they cast the spell over the yew tree. And when it next looked at itself, it was back to how it had been in the first place, with big, strong branches covered in 1,000 upon 1,000 of tiny, dark, needle-like leaves. And the fairies said, "You're going to be like this. You're going to be like this forever. You are going to be a splendid tree. You and your brothers and your sisters and your descendants, the trees that come after you, you will all live for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, each one of you, longer than almost any other tree in the world. You will look amazing. You will grow into fantastic heights and shapes. Your berries, oh, your berries will be so amazing. They will trick people into getting tummy ache if they eat them, but they will be beautiful red berries. People will tell stories about you. People will take some of your wood and make longbows, and they will make bowls, and they will make cups, and your wood will be absolutely beautiful forever. You will be splendid, just the way you were made." And the yew tree decided that it was going to be happy, just the way it was. Thank you for watching. Thank you so much for watching. I have been Chloe of the Midnight Storytellers, and you can find more of my stories on my own YouTube channel, which is Midnight Storytellers UK. And of course I have a website, midnightstorytellers.co.uk. I have absolutely loved being part of Gloucester Folk Trail 2022, and I am so grateful to Danny and Jojo and Gareth for making it really easy for me to take part. Have fun, everybody. See you soon.